healing from within. BFF, we rise above, stronger together, we shine with love. Faith unshaken, hearts on fire, fearless souls, we're reaching higher. Oh, step into your power, step into your light. BFFs here, let's live life. Unlock the diamond within, embrace your glow. You're unstoppable. Now enjoy the show. Welcome to BFF Empowerment, where you embrace your beauty, walk in faith, and live fearlessly.
Thank you for tuning in to the BFF Empowerment Podcast. And this is another edition of our Women on the Rise segment of the podcast. So today with me, I have Miss Sharon Dunlevy. Miss Sharon Dunlevy is a passionate educational coach and advocate for children in foster care. Thank you so much for joining us, Miss Levy.
Thank
Dunlevy.
you.
I'm sorry.
Thanks for having me. And you can just call me Sharon.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. So, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a advocate for children in foster care, specifically around the area of education. And I started doing this a few years ago through a licensing agency, a foster care licensing agency here in Indianapolis. And I did that under a grant, and I would go to the schools and make sure that they were getting individualized education plans as needed, that transportation was happening, things that the rights that children in foster care have through some education laws. I was making sure that those were being implemented. That was under a grant, and that grant ran out, and then COVID hit. So I've sort of just created my own agency where I train foster parents around the world, or around the nation, I should say, on
Mhm.
how to be educational advocates for the kids in their home. And so I teach them what I used to do myself. I teach them how to do that.
Okay, sounds great. So,
Yeah.
what inspired you to become an educational advocate for children in foster care?
I always wanted to work with children.
Mhm.
I I figured out that I wanted to be a teacher when I was in high school, and I took biology. I thought I was going to be a scientist. I took biology and child development the same year. Hated biology and loved child development. So I went to college to and studied education and special education. That was always my heart, was for the most vulnerable children. I
Mhm.
actually came out of college feeling a call to ministry, and so I was a
Mhm.
children's minister for almost 20 years, and then decided I needed to get back to serving those vulnerable children. So I bounced around a little bit, but the job at the licensing agency came up, and it seemed like a perfect fit, and it was, because I found my heart is just with these children in foster care and what's happening with them. And so I've just been doubling down on that and trying to kind of change their outcomes so that when they graduate, they're ready to live independently and can take care of themselves, have families, have a
Mhm.
successful life as an adult.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I have a brother who was raised in the system. He wasn't in foster care per se, but he was in a group home.
Hmm.
So basically, yeah, he was there from 12 to 18. And thankfully, he was fortunate enough to graduate from high school with honors, go on to
Wow.
college. He was able to enlist in the army. So he was actually one of the very few, because statistically, children in foster care or just in the system in general. aren't very successful. They're usually, once
Right.
they're out, they're 18, they kind of just fumble their way through life. And, I'm glad he was one of those, percentages that was able to be successful.
Sure. And you're right. I mean, at least a quarter of the children who age out of foster care struggle into adulthood because they have trauma that wasn't resolved, or they just, there's just things that we don't think about that we fall back on for our parents. When I
Hmm.
graduated, I still had my parents there, and
Hmm.
and things like taking care of money and things. They don't have anybody to fall back on. And so you're right. He is one of the lucky few that did well, and that's great because a lot of children in foster care don't do well in college. They don't do well in military just because they've got unresolved trauma.
Exactly. And our life, unfortunately, was a lot of trauma. And he
Mm.
became a ward of the state because he became a habitual runaway because of the
Oh,
abuse that we were, going through
yep,
at home.
yep.
And me as a child, I felt like because I was a girl, I wouldn't do well in foster care because I went
Hmm.
to school with a lot of girls that were in foster care, and I heard the horror stories of just the different things that they endured. So I made the decision at 12 that, you know what, I'll just stay here and endure what I'm going through until I turn 18. It's better
Mm.
than going into foster care.
Sure, sure. And that's a tough decision to have to make at 12 years old.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
Like, and I was just like, I was scared. Like I wanted to do the running away too, but I was just
yeah,
like, okay, he's a boy. He may have a better chance to be able to, you know,
yeah,
make something and be able to protect himself. And I'm like, I'm a girl, and
yeah.
I just don't. So I was like, you know what? I'll stay here till I'm 18, and then I can move on from there.
Wow. And look at what you're doing now. You're
Yes,
empowering,
ma'am.
right? You're empowering people to live to their potential. I love it.
Because of the abuse that I went through as a child is the reason that I'm actually blind.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yes.
um,
That is not unusual. Blindness, and then a lot of kids, the abuse is they get their ears hit, and so they're deaf.
mhm.
Yes, unfortunately, again, that is something we don't think about, right? When we think of
Yes.
abuse, we think of bruises on the body, but I mean,
Mhm.
it can cause physical damage, and that's, you've had a lot to overcome, and that's amazing that you do that and bring awareness to the fact that it can be a permanent damage.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, our previous episode, because April is Child Abuse Awareness Month, we actually did, and I shared my story about, being a child of abuse and how, yeah, the abuse is what caused me to become totally blind, and just bringing awareness to, parents that have endured trauma and then they turn around and project that trauma on their children
Yeah.
because of their circumstances and how their children came to be, and just shedding some light on just the importance of loving your children and protecting them and not being the one that caused them harm.
Yeah, and we kind of have in this society that saying that abused children will become abusers, and it's actually not true. What it is yes, abused children will have children that are often abused, but it's because they never had a model of a good relationship, so they fall back into patterns of bad relationships. So it tends to be the abused children, their children may be abused by the same person that abused them.
Hmm.
That comes up a lot. Or they end up in a relationship with somebody who's very similar to their abuser, and then that person abuses their children. So we need to break that idea that abused children will become abusers. It's more that we need to be helping abused children develop positive relationships so that they don't end
Don't
up
repeat the
falling into
cycle.
those patterns, right?
Yes, and for me, my mother was actually not abused.
Mm, mm-hmm.
She actually took her frustrations about being a single mother
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
on us. And
Yeah.
I'm a mother myself, and I could never imagine doing to my children what was done to me. Like,
Right.
I made the conscious decision to do the complete opposite
And you have to
because,
be aware of
yeah,
that, right?
yes.
You have to think, I mean, it takes a lot because I know I had this background in child development and all this stuff. And my 23-year-old will tell you I made a lot of mistakes as a parent, a lot of mistakes because I had my own triggers that I wasn't necessarily aware of. And you grow
Mm-hmm.
and you learn those triggers. But if we just blindly go through life not thinking through these things, it's
Mm-hmm.
very easy to take that out on the people nearest to you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Okay. So you're known for helping foster parents, navigating, education with their foster children. What are some common misconceptions that these parents face, and how do you help them overcome these challenges?
sure. So the common misconceptions that I hear the most is that when a school hears that a child is in foster care, their immediate reaction is, oh, I'm going to have trouble with this kid. And it may be true because they have trauma, and trauma
Mhm.
causes these children they live in the fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? That's what trauma does to you. And when trauma is not resolved, you're always in survival instinct. You're always looking for the next person that's going to abuse you or treat you badly. And so what happens in the schools is the kids do act out, but it's because the schools don't understand trauma. They're
Mhm.
trying to use traditional discipline that actually is a trigger. So, for example, a lot of times when a kid gets in trouble in school, they're sent to the principal's office.
Mhm.
Well, that can be a trauma trigger for several reasons. One, the teacher is pointing out a kid, right? They're putting
Mhm.
all the focus on this kid who's being bad, and so that becomes a trigger that all the tension's on them. The kids don't want the attention on themselves. They want it on somebody else. So they may be triggered then. And then when they're asked to leave the classroom, kids who have been abused or who have trauma or even neglected, isolation can be a very scary thing because things happened to them when they were alone or with one adult. So
Mhm.
sending them to the principal's office, also sending them into an office with somebody who's in power, again,
Authority, yes.
yes, the
Mhm.
authority. Those are the ones who abuse them. So trauma kids have very low trust levels of adults. And so
Mhm.
when we use these traditional types of discipline, we're just re-traumatizing them. The other thing is trauma physically affects the brain growth. So it's not unusual for kids in foster care to be behind their peers because their brain hasn't developed as much as their peers. That can
Mhm.
be reversed. Our brains are designed to be reversed, but they have to have positive experiences. So a lot of times, again, a lot of times the schools are trying to use these traditional methods like sending them out of the classroom, or they might suspend them if they're acting up too many times. Well, the
Mhm.
more the kids out of the classroom, the less they're learning.
Yes. I've even
So,
seen, like, even when I was in school, where they would to take the child's desk and sit them outside the classroom in the
oh,
hallway.
in the hallway, like what are they supposed to learn out there?
Mhm.
Yeah, they have to be able to be in the classroom absorbing what's being learned. And I'm not going to say schools mean to do this because they don't. But let's be
Mhm.
real, we underpay education in this country,
Mhm.
and they've got too many kids with too many needs. The teachers don't have aides. They're trying to do this all by themselves with 30 to 35 kids in their classroom, and that's unreasonable.
Yeah.
We can't expect these teachers to be able to deal with kids with trauma and gifted kids and kids with autism and kids with ADHD all equally.
Mhm.
So, we need to they need more support in the schools.
Yes.
And that's a big one. The other thing that I teach the foster parents is there are laws that protect kids in foster care so that they aren't sent out of the classroom or suspended and all that, but they don't always know those laws. So I teach them the Every Student Succeeds Act as well as the Individuals with Disabilities Act, because this trauma can be considered a disability. I mean, like I said, it physically affects the growth of the brain. That's a disability. So I
Mm-hmm.
teach them how to navigate those two laws to make the schools or to help the students learn the best that they can. Because if they're not learning, then how do we expect them to survive as adults?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Okay. So, based on your bio, it shows that you've spoken at many conferences and competed in speaking competitions. So what is your favorite message to share when you're on stage, and why does it resonate so deeply with you?
I love to share the story of one of the students that I worked with. He was like your brother. He basically grew up. Now he went in much younger than your brother, but he grew up
Mm-hmm.
in a group home, a residential center. And this particular residential center was for children with high needs in terms of behavior. And
Mm-hmm.
if you know anything about children, putting children who have behavior issues all in one room and all in one home doesn't work because they feed
Mm-hmm.
off of each other, right? So he was in there until his end of his ninth grade year, and then we were registering him for his 10th grade year at a school, at a local school. He had gotten into one of our foster families, one of our best foster families. Well, he came with this label of this child that was, or this boy that was angry and violent and all of these things. So, of course, the school was like, oh, I don't know if we want him. And it took a lot for us to get him enrolled in the school working with us. But we knew, because we had worked with him all summer, that he wasn't like that. Once he got out of
Mm-hmm.
that environment where they were feeding on each other and he felt safe, he was a different kid. I mean, he still got angry, but he wasn't violent, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked with him, but oh, well, while he was in residential, I forgot, while he was in residential, like I said, he did his ninth grade year there, they lost his credits. So when he came out, he had no credits from his ninth grade year.
Wow.
So we had to redo his ninth grade year as well as do all of his high school work through,
Mm-hmm.
that he was doing then. And of course, he wanted to quit, all of these things. Well, we worked with him. Like I said, he was in a really good foster home. His foster dad, especially, really took him under his wing. And we got him graduated half a semester or half a year late, so a semester late. But we got
Mm-hmm.
him graduated. He chose to stay in the foster care system. Many of the states do have voluntary programs where kids can stay in foster care, sort of. They can stay in the system after the age of 18 up till the age
Mm-hmm.
of 23. They live on their own, but they still have a caseworker, and there's money under what's called the Family First Prevention Services Act to help with
Mm-hmm.
things like room and board, and they helped him get his driver's license. He didn't want a car. They would have helped him get a car, but he didn't want a car. He wanted a motorbike. They got him a motorbike. And now he's turning 24 this month.
Oh,
And
wow.
he is a manager at a Domino's. He lives on his own. He's doing great. We're actually still in touch. We're seeing him in July. I mean, so he's the story I like to tell. But
Mm-hmm.
and I like to tell his story, one, because he's a success story, but two, because it illustrates how important it is for children in foster care to have multiple adults invested in them.
Exactly.
Because, like I said, they don't have family to fall back on. Actually, when he graduated high school, he did go back home. He tried to live with his dad, and his dad was still using drugs, and he said, I don't want to be here. So he called up his caseworker and was able to get back into the system. So he left the system for like 3 to 6 months, but he was
Mm-hmm.
able to get back in. But he has high resilience. So, that makes a difference. Not every foster kid is going to have those same resilience, but he had those adults that were invested in him, and that makes the that makes the biggest difference. And so when I speak at these conferences and I speak at, they did these speaking competitions and I do these podcasts, a lot of times what I'm wanting people to know is you don't have to be a foster parent to help kids in foster care. You can
Mm-hmm.
be one of those adults that's a mentor. You could be an adult that helps provide services. You could be an adult that helps connect them with services. One of the issues for children in foster care is, again, because they don't have adults to fall back on, if something does happen, they don't know how to navigate the system. I have another student that constantly is messaging me, and I can't really help her because I can't give her money, but
Mm-hmm.
her mother-in-law is controlling. And so she uses the threat of kicking her and her husband out of the house
Mm-hmm.
as a way to control their behaviors. And so,
Wow.
yes, I mean, she's right back in another abusive situation, right? The
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
husband's not abusive, it's his mother that is. And she uses this threat of I'm gonna evict you as a way to control them. And so
Mm-hmm.
this girl is always in that way, in that back and forth. And I'm trying to get her connected to, to housing authorities and things like that to help. But they
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to navigate those systems. They need
Exactly.
adults who are going to step up and say, "Oh, I can help you do this." The other thing that they struggle with is if they have unresolved trauma, working a job can be tough, right?
Exactly.
They
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to control their triggers. They don't necessarily have the self-regulation skills. And so employers don't understand and they'll fire them. And then they're
Mm-hmm.
jumping from job to job or they're on government assistance. I mean, 20% of children coming out of foster care will be homeless at some point because
Mm-hmm.
of that. And so, again, they need adults who are invested in them. So when I speak at these places, it's to help people understand what's going on with these children. We're talking about 20,000 kids aging out of foster care every year. That's a lot of kids that need help.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so, what can we do? And what can we do as a society? So, can we change systems? The other thing we need to think about is why are kids being removed in the first place? Are they being removed for reasons like adult or abuse and neglect? That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Are they being removed because their parents are in poverty? That's not okay. Why are
Exactly.
we not helping those parents get out of poverty? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, I'm trying to bring awareness to what we can do as a society, what we could do as individuals to help these kids so that when they become adults, they're successful and they're productive. I mean, we always talk about we want productive members of society. Well,
Exactly.
we're not setting them up to be productive members of society. We've got to change some things on our end so that they can be
Mm-hmm.
productive members of society. So that's why I do that, why I speak so much.
Not a problem. Okay. Um, so how do you maintain hope and motivation when working with a system that can often feel slow to change?
Ugh, it's so hard, but I do a lot of self-care. I really do. I do a lot of self-care. I have conversations with people like you, right? That are interested and wanting to make a difference, and that feeds my soul. I connect with people who are in the same field with me so that have people to lean on. I also have an accountability group of women that we're all kind of business owners of different types of businesses, and that group feeds me. We read books together, we have discussions, we create goals together, and that's made a huge difference. I guess the biggest thing is not to do it in isolation, right? I work from
Mhm.
home, but I'm connected, and you have to be connected.
Mhm.
The other thing I do is I take time to do things I enjoy. So our kid is now 23. They do still live in the basement because the housing market in Indy is horrible, but we they're kind of on their own, right? They live their own
Mhm.
life. So my husband and I, we do little what we call our adventures. We do an adventure every month and try and do something just fun and different. And it doesn't have to cost a lot, but just something that we can get out and do things and have some fun. We try and look for the positives as much as we can. It's a little hard sometimes, especially right now with the political climate and everything. We tend to fall back into bad patterns and we'll have to say, no, quit reading Facebook and quit reading the news for a bit, you know?
Yes.
And but I don't have a kid at home, so I take care of myself that way. For a foster parent, there is a lot more they have to do. Any parent, right? It takes a
Mhm.
lot, but taking
Yes.
time for ourselves is really, really important. And I do make sure that I do that and keep myself fed so that I can be that beacon for others.
Okay, sounds good. Definitely. Um, so what can you say have been your biggest struggle with getting your message across when it comes to the education of children in foster care and working with schools and the foster, parents and foster families?
So the biggest struggle is finding the right people. So, for example, I wrote a report on the educational outcomes of children in foster care, and I sent it out. I wrote the report last year, sent it out in January of this year, and I sent it out to like all of the child welfare directors as well as the directors of departments of ed in every state
Mhm.
just to kind of get some conversations going. And I've had some states very interested in talking with me, but out of 51, because I did DC as well, out of 51 reports I sent out, I think I've had no, I probably had 10 conversations. Some of them,
Okay.
though, that's it. And some of those conversations were not to um, say, oh, well, how can we do this better? They wanted to, quote unquote, educate me on how they are already taking care of these things.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? It was kind of
Wow.
like they took it a little defensively.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, I mean, I listen and I'm like, oh wow. But then it's always that, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? But like I said, I've had some states who have been really, really into into the conversation. Rhode Island especially was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect timing. This is the area we wanted to work on this year. So that's a
Mhm.
challenge. The other challenge that's coming up is with all of the changes around the Department of Education at the federal level,
Yes.
what's going to happen to these laws that I rely on? So that's my biggest challenge now is
Mhm.
that uncertainty. I mean, we rely on these three laws to really protect our kids in foster care, and we don't know what's going to happen to them. So I've been doing a lot of research and study and keeping up on each of the legislation things that are going on around this. I even did a webinar yesterday. I attended a webinar yesterday and about this, and the person who did the webinar did make a good point. The executive orders are just basically what Trump wants. It
Want.
doesn't
Yeah.
mean what Congress is going to do. So
Mhm.
the that's another thing I'm trying to bring awareness to is we still have a chance to save some of these things by writing our Congress people, by making sure that we're
Mhm.
involving them. I made phone calls one day just to every representative and state senator in my area, just to
Mhm.
say, I'm one of your constituents, and I think the Department of Ed needs to stay where it's at. But those are the challenges that we face. The other challenge is schools. They don't not want to help, but they have their own issues, and I think there are some budget issues that go on that I'm not really I don't completely understand. I never understand why schools don't want to give a child an individualized education plan or an IEP
Mhm.
because they get federal funds for that. So
Yes.
but I don't know that they get enough federal funds. That may be what it is. I don't know. They're always very reluctant. They want to try other interventions. They want to do this, but those interventions don't protect my kids from being kicked out of the classroom or suspended. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I want them to have that IEP so that they can't use those types of discipline on them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other challenge. And sometimes the schools just don't even know the laws. I mean, it's just so much happens. I understand, but sometimes they're not really good about staying on top of these things. And so it takes a lot to educate the schools, and I'm trying to educate the parents so that they can educate the schools, and that gets tricky too. But
Mm-hmm.
I do the best I can. I get the word out as much as I can. I train as many foster parents as I can, because it really does have to be kind of a grassroots and a top-down project, right? We got to all
Exactly.
work from all the angles and meet in the middle. And so I
Mhm.
try and do that.
So, have you ever had a foster parent or a foster family that was resistant to what you were trying to teach them to help them be better, for the children and for their children to do better?
Not really. The foster parents that I work with, they want to learn, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, I do teach for the state of Ohio, and I do have some students or some foster parents that are in my classes just because they need the training hours. But for
Mhm.
the most part, the groups of foster parents that I work with, they want to learn. They want to be in my classes. They sign up because they want to be there, not because they have to be there.
Okay.
But I do every so often run into foster parents, usually older foster parents, who, especially around the idea of disabilities, are resistant to labeling their kids with
Mhm.
they don't want them to be labeled and then get an IEP because they have some feelings around that term disability. And I
Mhm.
do I do have some foster parents, and usually it's more of the ones who are fostering to adopt, but I do get some of that. But no, most of the foster parents I work with, they do it because they love the kids. I mean, I know there's this idea out there that foster parents are making money. Trust me, they're not making money. They don't get enough a month in order to
Mhm.
even, provide all of that you would provide for a kid if they were your own. The cost is not, they don't get that cost covered the way that people
Oh,
think.
wow.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
because I've always heard that, oh, they receive stipends, and that's why a lot of people go into fostering and actually
Mm-hmm.
not adopting just so that they
Right.
can continue getting the funds, and then they can just foster as many children and actually use that as a means of employment.
Right. And it's much more complicated than that because it depends on the level of trauma and all of those things. So the stipends can be as low as like 120 a month in
Oh,
some
wow.
states. Oh yeah. It's not making money. So, but that's, that is one of those societal conceptions that are out there, and so that's, something that needs to be overcome because, again, when we vilify foster parents, then we don't feel like we want to help them, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we don't always think about the fact that when we vilify foster parents, we're also doing a disservice to our foster kids because we're
Exactly.
not stepping up to the plate to make things better for them. So yeah, so for the most part, I don't have bad foster parents that I work with. I have good ones that I work with, but I know there are bad ones out there, and they probably fly under the radar. So I wouldn't
Mhm.
necessarily see them as a trainer because they're not going to sign up for my classes.
Yes,
Right?
got you. So what's
Yeah.
the training that you do? Or is it like in person? Is it virtual or is it hybrid or all of the above?
I do mostly virtual trainings, though I have done some. I'm close enough to the state of Ohio here in Indiana that I can do some in person, and I do some in-person trainings here in Indiana. But a lot of the trainings have gone virtual since COVID, and partly
Mhm.
because in the past, the foster parents would have to find babysitters to attend training,
Hmm.
and that's hard. I mean, it's hard
Exactly.
enough for the kids to trust their foster parents. Now you want them to trust a babysitter? I mean, that's a tough
Hmm.
thing. So virtual trainings work better. So I do trainings, virtual trainings. I have one class that I developed myself that I do for the state of Ohio called the Educational Rights of Children in Foster Care. And but then I also I've been certified to train for the National Training Development and Curriculum for foster parents, their curriculum. They have a extensive curriculum on different topics, and I am certified to teach any of those topics as well. So I teach those classes. And then I have a group of foster parents that I just every month I offer them a free class. In fact, I had a free class with them last night. I invited a licensed therapist to come in, and she talked to them specifically about how do you manage meltdowns and
Hmm.
tantrums. And it was a really good class. And so I offer that once a month just for free. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that next. With the classes, is there like alternative, like therapy and different things like that that are offered as well to help the foster parents?
Yeah, so since my specialization is in education and I've learned about trauma and the brain over the years, but I am not a licensed therapist. So when I can, I try and bring in guest speakers for my group, which they really appreciate. I've connected with somebody who taught them about sleep and how to
Hmm.
get their kids to sleep because that is a big issue again,
When you're dealing
nighttime.
with trauma. Hmm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, nighttime for foster kids and kids with trauma is very, very stressful. And so he was teaching them how to help their kids get to sleep. I've got another person coming in June who's going to talk about creating senses of belonging in their home. How do you help foster kids feel like they actually belong to that
Hmm.
family, not just as an outsider, right?
Especially if there's biological children there as well, if you're
Yes.
bringing in foster children.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. So I'm having her come and talk about that. So yeah, so I try and use my network to fill in the gaps that I don't have, right? Like those
Hmm.
areas that I am not trained in, I'm not an expert on.
Hmm.
But one of the classes I train for the state of Ohio that I really enjoy is I train a class on fostering racially and culturally diverse children. And
Hmm.
that's part of that national training development and curriculum company that I was telling you about. And that's one of the classes I am certified to train. And that is a really
Hmm.
good class because um, it's very rare that you're going to get, unless you're fostering to adopt and you've specifically asked for children that match your race and culture. It's
Hmm.
you're at some point you're going to foster a kid who is very different than yourself. And
Exactly.
yeah, and so having that awareness, I'm very impressed with what Ohio offers. They offer a lot of variety in their classes that touch on a lot
Hmm.
of different topics, and that's really good.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay. So, what advice would you give someone who wants to become more involved in advocacy for foster youth, but doesn't know where to start?
Sure. So I would Google foster care licensing agency near me and see who's there. So you always have a state agency, but there will be other agencies that are kind of individually run, and
Hmm.
those are the ones that need the help the most. So even if you just want to donate things like the agency I worked for, we are always collecting diapers and kids' clothing, suitcases, that image of the foster kids moving home to home with their stuff in a trash bag really does
Hmm.
happen. So used suitcases, book bags, school supplies, all of those things. So I would contact your licensing agency near you, see what kinds of needs they have. And sometimes they're looking for tutors or mentors. So those types of things, and just kind of go from there.
Okay, definitely. So what I like to do at the end of our interview is I like to do a segment called What is she thinking? And so it's basically where I say a random quote or phrase, and then you just fill in the blank with the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
All right.
What is she thinking? What are her thoughts? Quick, fast, no blinking. What do you got?
So the first one is children are
Oh, beautiful.
okay. I'm not your.
Hmm. My mind went blank. I don't know. I'm not your.
Okay,
That's an interesting one. Okay, my mind completely went blank. I don't know what
we'll
I.
come back
Yeah,
to it.
yeah.
Okay, apple pie is
Delicious.
you better not.
Hurt a child.
The clock is ticking, so.
I better get working.
And then we're back to I'm not your.
Average advocate.
All right. Okay. So, well, we're coming to the end of the episode. Is there anything else you would like to share? Any words of encouragement? Just anything that you want the listeners to take from this episode?
Um, I would love to share that if you would like a copy of that education report that I sent out to the states, you can get that at www.fostercarereport, all one word, fostercarereport.com. And you'll get a copy of that report. And I would love to share that with everybody.
Okay. And do you have any social media links, website of yours
I
that you would like
am
to share?
very active on LinkedIn. That's my favorite place to be. So you just Google Sharon Dunlevy,
Mhm.
SharonDunlevy, and you will find me.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining and sharing, your journey, your advocacy and the importance of education for children in foster care.
You're welcome. I'm so glad you had me come on.
You are so welcome. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Don't forget to follow the podcast on all major podcasting platforms. You can also follow us on Facebook at BFF Empowerment Podcast. We're on Instagram as BFF Empowerment Podcast. And we are also now on Threads at BFF Empowerment Podcast. And we will talk to you guys later. Thank you so much for joining. See you next time.